Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. And as you probably have come before, we try to do these webinars fairly regularly. Once a month is kind of the idea, is to give you a bit of update news that's coming from the sector, and then sometimes invite guests onto the webinar to talk about development issues and wider kind of sector issues. Some hints and tips on our software across the kind of suite of products that we provide, and generally kind of update you on what's happening from SDS's point of view. So I'll introduce myself. A lot of people probably already know me, but my name is Andrew Markham. I kind of head up the new business side of the business and run the consultancy side. And I have some of my team here today, which is great. I'll let them introduce themselves. So I have John Stevens. Hi, John.
Hello, I'm John Stevens. Probably know most of you. I've been delivering affordable housing for the last 30 years. And the last 9 years I've been working with SDS, enjoying myself, meeting lots of you and seeing what you're up to and trying to help you. So yeah, here I am. Yeah.
Good morning, John. That's from leaving school, isn't it? 30 years. Just from school.
Yeah, bless you.
And Paul.
Good morning, everybody. I'm sure that most of you know me. I'm the technical manager at SDS, and I'm predominantly responsible for detail projects on ProVal and SQL.
So obviously we had our user group meeting. Those who did attend, it was lovely to see lots of people in London. Unfortunately, John was not feeling very well, so we had to kind of manage without him. But it was good to see a lot of our clients, and obviously we was waiting for some key industry updates. Okay, so yeah, so there's lots happening in the sector. We did an update on our user group meeting, and we was obviously waiting for the rent settlement, which has been published, but we are trying to establish kind of the detail of that, and I think most of us are. So we'll give you our take on it, on that. And you know, there's obviously the social housing bill that's going through Parliament at the moment. So again, we don't have too much detail on the outcome of that, but we're kind of trying to kind of give you an overview of key elements that's happening in the sector now. So the first thing we're going to do is going to pass you to John Stevens, and he's going to go through his presentation, and we can ask questions from his points that he raised. Okay, so fire away, John. Can you share your screen?
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And
don't forget to kind of pose those questions, and we can try and kind of answer them as we go. Paul, do you want to turn your kind of video off?
Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the start of a hopefully not too dry PowerPoint appraisal. PowerPoint presentation, and it's all about the appraisal was what we put on the agenda. So what do we actually know? Well, how much do we know? This is all about inflation and sector rent setting, which is really important to us. We know some of the information, we don't know all of the information. We know that we should be setting rents at CPI plus 1%, but based on recent September CPI, it looks like that would be at 10.1% plus 1% would be over 11% for our rent setting come April. And obviously that led to some concern, and the fact that there was the consultation earlier this summer from the 31st of August to the 12th of October for 6 weeks, looking at basically 3, 5 or 7% rent setting. And the outcome of that was announced in the autumn statement on the 17th of November, and it said a maximum of 7% rent ceiling for social rent, affordable rent for March 23, April 23 to March 24, but the details to be confirmed. We've talked about this previously in a webinar, and we looked at some of the consultation documentation that said the rent ceiling would be for existing tenancies only. We haven't had that confirmed. I've been looking for the detail. We can't get the detail yet. Nothing's been released. But what else did we learn from the autumn statement? Well, we learned that LHA is frozen at 2023 cash levels, and stamp duty cuts remaining until 2025. The NHF responded the following day saying that most of its members have also agreed to a 7% rent ceiling for shared ownership inflation for the same period. Again, details to be confirmed. Is it for existing tenancies only? Is it for new developments as well? That's where we at SDS are really keen to understand this existing tenancies rent ceiling versus all tenancies, including new tenancies. If there's a divide in the road, that's really quite important. So there's a little bit of history here, or a little bit of background. And we've also got the local housing allowance, which is based on government figures, based on the broad rental market area. We put all these figures in the background of our software. So these are really important for all of us in the sector. It's a little bit anarchy, but basically, if it's all about the appraisal, it's all about what rent can we set on the appraisal going forward. And we've had some information, but not all the detail. So the consultation that we've been through as a sector included some detail. It also, I've shown this slide before, and I have no apologies for showing it again, because even Inside Housing called it a rent cap. And I got a bit agitated about that. It's not about rent cap, it's about rent ceiling. But everybody in the sector started to call it rent cap. Rent cap is a totally different thing. And this is part of the documentation from the consultation. And within that, it's basically, you can see at the bottom of the screen, they overtyped on the original guidance for policy statement on rents and added additional information. And this was the documentation that accompanied the consultation on should we have a rent ceiling. And within there, it talked about rent cap. And rent cap is basically the journey of formula or social or target rents since 2001, when the social rent formula came into being. And what the government have said, and this is the distinction, because we're now at 2023, considering 2023-24, the basis of what started out as social rents formula for 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed, 4 bed, 5, 6 has grown by inflation, a government approved inflation rate over time. And that's what rent cap is. It's basically saying there is a maximum that the formula can produce, and this is our government maximum. Yeah, that is different to how you inflate your rents every year. They're basically setting an upper barrier against which your rents should hit, and you shouldn't go beyond. And that is what the rent cap is. The annual rent inflation is a different thing. It's actually about your organization and the regulator of social housing saying how much can all rents, including affordable rent and local authority rents, because the regulator looks after those as well now, how much can all the social affordable housing rents go up by? And because we are a regulated sector, they are saying, we've had a consultation, and in the autumn statement, they said that should be 7%, and we think it's just for existing tenancies. Rent cap is basically something that's been in place since 2001, and rent cap has increased as an upper limit that you're supposed to not exceed. So rent cap, rent ceiling, yeah, there's a little bit confusion about the terminology, and I don't apologize for going through that again, because you need to get your terminology straight. So why do we have the social rent and the rent cap? It was because back in 2000, they wanted to actually unify rents between housing associations and local authorities. They wanted to base it on property values and local earnings levels. They wanted to converge local authority council housing rents with housing association rents. And you might remember, those of you been in the sector alongside myself, there was this thing called rent restructuring, rent convergence. And interestingly, some of the housing associations have said it should happen again because it was stopped by the coalition government. There was this journey of a maximum £2 on the rent per annum to try and raise council housing, local authority rents in line with housing association rents. The whole idea of one house being let next door to another at very different rates for the same property. That's what brought about rent convergence. And people are actually talking about rent convergence coming back in. So that's kind of a side anorak discussion at the moment. Should rent convergence come back in between local authorities and housing association rents? So rent cap has been with us since 2000 and it's at upper government level. What we're talking about is actually annual rent inflation and how much should it go up by with CPI inflation at around 10-11%. It would be a huge increase for our residents. So we had the consultation, we had the documentation. Inside of that, there is explanation of the CPI journey, the inflation journey, and what it would look like with 1% on top. And you can see the little red figures in the middle window. We're getting close to where we are at the moment. And you'll see that inflation was low, 2020 and 21, 1.7, 21, 22, 0.5, add 1% to those figures, and you're getting rent inflation around 2.7, 1.5%. Starts to pick up the inflation rate for 22, 23, 3.1 plus 1 is 4.1. That's what we've had recently for residents, but obviously the consultation was about the rising inflation on the horizon, plus 1% was going to be too much. And the government thought, well, actually, we need to do something here and intervene, hence the consultation, hence the statement. What do we do in SDS world? We mirror the guidance from the government. So I put a table here that is embedded in the background currently of SDS ProVal. It's not available for administrators, it's actually available to SDS people, because we are increasing or inflating the social rent that is calculated inside ProVal by the government, the approved government figures. And then there's a debate, and maybe we get some guys contributing on this, but there's a debate when we use ProVal, what is the target rent at handover? And probably if I listen back to this recording, I'd say this is very Anaraki and very niche, John. but when we put ProVal together, and believe me, we put it together with the best of intentions to help you guys, we realized you guys are looking at schemes that could be 3-5 years in the future. And you actually want to say, what is the rent that will be on the tenancy agreement in 3 or 5 years' time? And with our best intentions, all we can do is reflect the inflation rates from the government and what the assumed future inflation rate is reflected at us by the government. And that's what we put in the background to get target rent at handover. No one's contradicting me at the moment, so I'll carry on presenting.
That's good, John, because it is confusing, isn't it? And what we'll do is Paul will show you this in ProVal to back up your slides here, so we can see the kind of where it actually sits and the impact of it. Because it's good, always good, a reminder of that.
So we've had this consultation. We've got lots of notes in an amended rent standard associated with the consultation. That's what I've been showing you. It's applicable to social affordable rent, registered providers and local authorities, because the regulator of social housing is now setting the rents for the rent increases for local authorities, as well as for us in the housing association sector. In the notes, it says it applies to existing tenants, not new properties or relets, to be confirmed. That's the detail I'm really looking for. There is also, in the consultation, it suggests a possible duration for 2 years. We haven't seen that outcome yet. The government looked at the financial impact in those documents over 5 years. And it said that households would be paying 3.8 billion less in rent if it went for a 5% ceiling. It's actually gone for a 7% ceiling, but most of the evaluation in the consultation was based on 5%. It looked at a reduction of housing benefit costs. So there's obviously a benefit for the government not paying the inflated rates of rent alongside CPI and housing benefit. So probably a question in the sector is, if we get these savings, can we have an increase in grants, because we're not going to get this income in? So maybe some partners are saying, well, I may need to renegotiate some of my grant rates because I'm not getting CPI uplift on my rent. There's also an issue there in terms of, where does our board sit in terms of our social purpose? Of course, we're trying to support people on low incomes, but we're trying to keep our business plans sustainable as well. So if we get less income in, is there more subsidy available to actually plug the gap, as it were? There is also in the documentation freedom for RPs to set lower rent increases. Now, I'm wondering whether, if the guidance document was for existing tenants to have this rent ceiling of 7%, would our boards kind of say, well, if it's 7% for existing residents, shouldn't we have that across the board for our new developments as well? And it kind of leaves the door open, I think, for the freedom of boards to kind of set their rent ceiling policy maybe across all developments, including new developments. Otherwise, are we in a two-rule situation where existing residents are receiving the 7% ceiling, but new developments, are we looking at CPI plus 1% as the rent setting for new developments? Or would that be seen as a conflict by the board, who might say, no, let's keep it to 7% for everything, including new development? I'm just putting that curveball out there because we haven't had the detail.
So John, just jump on that before you move on then.
Yeah.
Is there any news about the detail that's going to happen? Because clearly, you know, this is affecting appraisals now. People want to be able to kind of model the scenarios. If your scheme is coming into, you know, completion next year, what are you setting?
We are getting so many questions about this and how to set rents on future developments. And I'm kind of reflecting it back and saying, well, how are your board taking the decision? And we've only just heard November the 17th, was it? The statement that it said 7% ceiling.
That's right.
So people were assuming the worst from the consultation. It might be 5% because that's what all the documentation said was the preferred rate. We're going with what was said in the autumn statement at 7%. And basically, lots of organisations have been looking at their business plans and they want the detail. Is this for existing residents? Is it for new developments as well? Yeah. I would put, in the absence of the detail from the government and the regulator, what are your boards thinking? Are they going to apply it across the board? Because it appears they've got the freedom to set lower rent increases, and some will actually look at 7% and say, what can we afford that's lower than that, perhaps? You know, so there is a freedom in this consultation about what the rents will be going forwards. What's really important is how that dovetails with what you're doing in ProVal, isn't it? That in a way, you need your own organisational inflation assumptions being directed within ProVal as well. So I haven't got an answer. I'm putting that out there as a discussion.
It'll be interesting to know from everyone who's actually on this, if they've heard any more about a date that this information is going to be published, or the detail, or it's going to be published by the end of December, or a date, because it'd be good to know from everyone. And we have got a question, and Mark and Paul wants to answer this, and he will answer this live. The question is about Mark says that the users put their own future inflation rate expectations in the system, and SDS don't do that. So I think this is a key point here, and Paul is going to demonstrate what we do put in ProVal. And just a follow-on question really from John is, obviously the 7% ceiling is applied to affordable units, but supported housing is not. Is that right? Supported housing.
Yeah, if I just move on a bit.
Oh, sorry. Carry on.
We can actually cover some of that.
Right.
They're not proposing to make exceptions for particular categories at present. This was all part of the consultation documentation. So this is all I've got to work on. You're asking the right questions, Andrew, because it's all flowing on seamlessly. Yeah. We're all asking the same questions.
Sure.
They proposed the 5% ceiling in the consultation, and they're also saying within the consultation documents that the formula rent for social would continue to increase by CPI plus 1%. So the formula rent would continue to increase by CPI plus 1%, but it would be subject to those rent caps that we talked about, which is the upper limit that have travelled since 2001. But those rent caps are inflated actually by CPI plus 1.5%. So rent inflation is one thing, and rent cap inflation is another thing. So the rent ceiling is what we're talking about for rent inflation, and rent cap inflation is a totally different thing. It's basically the upper limit. They don't want to jeopardize providers' financial viability, and people can apply for an exemption apparently under the processes under the current rent standards. So they don't want to see people distressed by it and their business plans distressed, but it all points back at the regulator and the conversation with the regulator about your business plan. So they're proposing not to make exceptions at the moment, but if you are under high financial pressure, then speak to them and they may make an exception. I'm not sure that answers your question directly, but it's some guidance from what we've got. We've got the local housing allowance as a lot of people's upper limit when they start to look at rents, because that's the maximum of housing benefit in England that most people hit the upper limit of. Especially around affordable rent. We've seen people take the mantra of affordable rent up to 80% of market, or LHA, whichever is the lower. Is kind of the Housing Association of sector have added, or LHA, whichever is the lower. But I know a lot of people set rents around that kind of mantra. From the autumn statement, the local housing allowance has been fixed at 2023 cash levels. So what we're hearing is basically a freezing of LHA at current rates. Yeah. What we're also seeing is social rent. Is it existing tenancies? Is it all new tenancies? Is going to have a 7% ceiling on it. So if local housing allowance is frozen, but social rent could go up by 7%. Social housing rent going up by 7% versus LHA being frozen at 2023 levels versus the rent cap going up by CPI plus 1.5% to be confirmed. Are we starting to get social rent rising higher than LHA rates in certain key areas of the country? People aren't able to use social rent because it's close to market levels. There is a government document that says you can use social rent in high affordability areas, and the definition of that, looking at a document that was published in 2020, is a minimum of £50 or more a week difference to private rents. Now, if private rents are going up by CPI 10% plus, yeah, are we going to get to this position where in these sort of borderline areas, market rents have gone up, so people can start to say, well, could I charge a social rent because my market rent has gone up so much and my social rent is limited by 7%. My LHA is frozen on what I can get for housing benefit. I'm now in a high affordability area. Can I now ask to apply social rent, which we know attracts more grant than if we were delivering affordable rent? This is kind of a secondary niche direction, yeah, that might be opening up by the freezing of LHA, the 7% ceiling on social rent, market rents continuing at CPI or more because of demand, and in those borderline areas, is social rent now a £50 a week difference to market rents? And could some housing associations say, I'm now in a high affordability area and pursue social rent instead of affordable rent and actually get a higher grant rate? This is kind of, you know, a secondary outcome that may appear. You can see how animated and excited I get about these issues, can't you?
Oh,
yeah.
wow, there's a lot of detail there. And my head's spinning, and I know most of this.
What else have we got going on? Well, we've got a new housing minister, Lucy Fraser,
yep.
The 14th housing minister in 12 years, the 5th housing minister this year. We'd love some detail from the housing minister, but maybe they're too busy changing housing ministers to come up with the detail. I don't know. She's a barrister in QC, and she's the MP for South East Cambridgeshire. That's about as much as I've been able to find out. She did speak to the Federation of Home Builders this week. We've also got Michael Gove back as the Secretary of State in the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. What do we know about Michael? Well, previously he was all about the reform of the private rented sector, and I've put private registered provider. We love an abbreviation, PRP, private registered provider. Yeah. I think within SDS we've seen a lot of contact and questions coming from people registering as private registered providers. The likes of McCarthy and Stone, major house builders, are setting up arms as private registered providers, and they're coming to quiz us about what's going on in the sector. Now, is that about government encouragement for private registered providers to actually be a marketplace reform of the existing poor quality private rented sector? Are development companies now seeing an opportunity in the private rented sector? We're certainly seeing a growth in private registered providers wanting detail and how to run appraisals. Michael Gove's also looking at ending Section 21 repossessions. We've seen a flood of those happening recently to get through the door. So that's no fault repossession practice. So they're trying to stabilize the private rented sector. Is that for the private registered providers to come into? Are they making it a more stable environment? I don't know. We've seen the promotion of first homes as a preferred solution versus shared ownership. Really, are we seeing discounted market sale as a preference to, certainly on affordable sites in the planning process, taking the place of shared ownership? I'll put that out there. Certainly, I'm hearing people not switching on to first homes as much as probably the government would like. I think it is going to creep up on us. There is also figures bandied around. It's always dangerous when people bandy around figures and targets. Michael Gove suggested working towards 300,000 new homes a year. We're a long way off that at the moment. Backbench MPs are actually saying, can we take away local authority delivery targets because they're causing too much pain? This kind of falls back into the NIMBY discussion that I don't want any development in my backbench constituency, but we all know the pressure we are under delivering in new homes. So that I think there's a tension even in the Conservative Party between targets and not in my backyard. We've got the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. So some people know it as the Planning White Paper, but it's actually a bill. It's introducing infrastructure levy, which some people are saying is going to phase out provisions under Section 106. So Section 106 thresholds may go up and money contributions might come in. We're get used to this terminology. Combined county authorities is being backed in the Levelling Up Regeneration Bill, and that means basically development corporations might happen, combined activity in wider sort of conurbations. Yeah, so think Manchester, think Leeds, corridor, etc. There is a freeing up of combined county activity and removal of borrowing limits on development corporations. So this is all in the bill and might signal more active local authority or combined local authority activity. They're also increasing the powers of compulsory purchase, which could lead to local authority regeneration. They're even talking about powers for local authorities to re-let vacant high street properties and what would be the process to do that. So these things are within this regeneration bill. What we need in the sector is detail. I'm going to finish in a minute, guys. I really am going to finish.
No, it's good. I mean, there's lots of detail. You've done a lot of work on this. It's really interesting. I know we're not saying much, John, but it's really interesting. I'm sure everyone else is finding it as equally interesting as me. And just if there's any questions, please write them. Let us know, and we'll try and get some space within John's presentation to ask some questions. But it's great.
I'm just about to finish anyway. So yeah, but all I want to put out there is we're getting interest in development from local authorities. We obviously support the RP housing association market. Yeah. And we're also getting this increasing interest from private registered providers, stroke developers. And yeah, I resisted the temptation to blend this together in some sort of Venn diagram overlapping way. But I'm personally really surprised when I go behind the curtain with each of these sort of entities, that there isn't more crossover. There seems to be a sort of political, how can I put it? There seems to be a political barrier from local authorities working with RPs. They want to be seen to be delivering, but have they really got the expertise? The expertise has actually shifted or did shift from local authorities into the RP housing association sector when transfer authorities happened. We're seeing local authorities on a very low skill base and low resources. And I can't help feeling there is some joint venture activity here that would actually benefit all, especially with the borrowing climate we're seeing at the moment, that housing association borrowing is going up. Local authorities have the benefit of public works loan boards, which is 2%-ish below where housing associations are. And then we're also seeing the private rented, private rented sector, the private registered providers coming in with their own borrowing capacity and own financial muscle. And is there a lap over here, an exchange of skills and resources here? And I just want to put that out there because I haven't seen this mature in any particular successful way. I've only just seen people compete with each other. And given the lack of housing we're delivering, surely there's an opportunity there. And I'll just put that out there. So I've come a long way from what's going on with the appraisal, but it's all about development and it's all about the rent. So I'll come full circle and say, we want to know about our future and the rent. We want to know about the future and development. And at the moment, I'm looking at these three entities working in isolation. Is it about time that some of them work together? And I'll just leave that like that.
Right.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Wow. Where do we ask a question from that? But there's loads of questions there. There's different elements to that. Thank you, John, for putting that together. One question that comes to mind for me is you mentioned it about the Section 106, and obviously there's been talk about the replacing of Section 106, and you mentioned there. So it looks like it's going to be combined with the seal and the Section 106. Is that in the bill, and that's and when is the bill going to be the second reading of the bill?
Oh my goodness, the question.
Sorry, I know,
okay.
but
it still needs House of Lords to go through it, and then it comes back for the final stages. So it's in its sort of third reading, I think, within the House of Commons. Then it goes to the House of Lords, and then it comes back for the final reading. So there's a lot within it, and a lot to be reshaped by politicians' comment. So it's going to take a while. So
the fear is the Section 106 is going to go, and it's going to be a levy.
I don't think it's going to go. I think the thresholds may change.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, yes, we don't know any definites, but it looks like it's going to be reshaped in a different format. And obviously, Section 106 is an important aspect of delivering affordable homes, and has been. So it is all a bit nervous about what change is going to be. So, right, as we think about your questions, let's move on to Paul. Paul's going to show us just the main impacts of what John has been talking about in ProVal. So it's kind of nice to see where this is, to remind you of where the elements are, and some of his kind of points on about inflation and setting rents, and the key things that you probably just need to keep an eye on when considering this. So, Paul, thank you for sharing your screen.
Thank you, John, for all of that. Mark Bridges asked, the users put in their own future inflation expectations. I'm assuming that he's talking about the inflation section in ProVal. That's future inflation, Mark. So yes, every organization has their own settings for that. What the gist of, or the large concentration of John's discussion is about, when you're using social rents or target rents, whatever you want to call them, or general needs rents as they've been named over the years, is if you use a January 99 value and put in the number of bedrooms and have a local authority which determines the area, that ProVal will calculate a social rent at the handover date. And that's important to understand that. So the chart that John showed you, in actual fact, is from a year ago. So at the moment, you can see inside ProVal, this is the chart that's in my ProVal at the moment. So if you had your updates, you wish you should be on this. Please do check with our support desk if you think you're not up to date. The current year, which is from March last year, sorry, from April this year, going through to March next year, is at 4.1%. The discussion is, what are we going to set for the future year? In other words, from April next year on for the following financial year. So I'm guessing that this is going to be 7%. Once we have official confirmation from Homes England what it's going to be, we will send out a script to every organization that has ProVal so that they can update the table in the background. This is not something a user can get at, but it's built into ProVal. I just wanted to show you what's inside mine. So we've been talking about inflation of rents. One of the most important things you need to look at. So I'll just quickly go to section G so you can actually see. Section G is about future inflations. So in that table, you can see that there is a rounded figure there, which was the original CPI, which was 2% plus 1. So for future years beyond this current year, 3% would be the inflation. But once a unit is handed over, section G comes into being, and as an organization, you can set what you want on it. So if you've had the tick box switched on, you can have different rents at different rates. You could have step rates if you want. So you could say, so this is the conundrum I'm finding out there is, how long do you think this blip in the inflation is going to go on for? I think that's $1 million question. I don't think any of us have a realistic view, in as much as we can say, well, it's going to be 3 years or 4 years or 5 years or maybe only 1 year. I think a lot will be determined by geopolitical issues that are going on in the world right now with energy and war in Ukraine. There's definitely having a marked effect on it. How long is that going to last? Don't know. And I think anybody who can answer that accurately could write their own check. But this, as an organization, is something that you're going to be tussling with. I certainly have lots of discussion with customers that I'm dealing with at the moment. They want to know, well, hang on a moment. If we're only going to go up at 3% on our rents, what about costs? So costs are rapidly increasing. So when it comes to development costs, I'm hearing figures of more than 10% on build costs. Well, that's going to have a divergence effect on our rents. So if we get restricted on social rents to 7% and our costs are going up by 10%, things are not getting better. So this is something that you need to take recognition of with your organization, and obviously with your financial directors, to have some sort of and I suspect this is going to be reviewed by many of you 6 months time, 3 months time maybe, and 9 months time, and in a year's time. So in other words, you're going to keep a very close eye on costs going forward versus income that you're able to. So the vast majority of the discussion this morning is about social rents. So I've got a small project here, and it is fictitious. It's for a particular area that's around our office, actually. As you can see, I've got a social rent and I've got an affordable rent. So a recap is affordable rents are set by you to a maximum, in theory, of 80% of the market. So if the market goes up by 10%, your affordable rents should go up in proportion because it's set at 80%. What you do with existing tenants on affordable products is going to be down to you yourselves. But the rules of the framework say that we should not exceed 80%. So inside ProVal, I've got 2 exactly the same size units. One is set at social rent, one is set at affordable. So I've just recently looked up the market rent per week in the area that I'm operating in. So that's £190, and 80% that is 152. And of course, the social rent at a March handover this year is £112. So if we just go down a little bit further on, one of the things that we don't always remember to set within the program is, are the service charges included in the rent or not included in the rent? So if I've got service charges of £10 a week, sorry, I've got this switched on. So if I set my £10 a week on both of them, obviously the tenant is going to be paying £112.81 and £10 on top, whereas that £10 is being absorbed by us, the builder or the owner of the property. So in other words, the real rent going forward is only going to be 142. And you'll quite often see, especially on blocks of flats or where you've got estate charges or something like that, all of a sudden the social rent looks a little bit, the actual income derived from it is going to be more. What I do, John and I certainly have noticed that a lot of you are not setting this field in here, rent inflate from. It's just above the rent box. You need to remember that target rents, or all rents, are supposed to be inflated from April. So you need to set that, because that will determine when the rent inflation from Section G will kick in the first time that inflates. I've purposely made this unit handover in March. So we've got 2 units that are handing over in March. If I now say, so that's £112.81. And if we looked at the cash flow, the cash flow on the social rent, on the revenues, I'm going to get in that particular month, I'm going to get £554. And then it goes up in April. So I'm literally, my handover rent is going to be that £119, which collectively is going to give me £534 in a year. And immediately in April, I'm going to get an increase, because the rents are set to inflate. So the inflation table in section G will kick in the very next month. So be careful about appraisals where you've got handovers really close to the April trigger point. You're only going to have rents for a short period of time. In other words, 1 month on this one at £112.81.
John.
I have worked with housing associations whose board have a policy saying whatever the existing rent is will stay like that for 12 months, and rent inflation, you know, we shouldn't have this jump from March to April immediately. The second month residents are moved in. That's happening less and less, but I have seen it with housing associations that they want stability in the first year for the resident. That's where this set the rent, and when it changes, is it April, is it not, is key in the rent setting section. I just want to make that point from reality in the sector.
So John, I'll pick it up on that point then. So would you say that you would delay completion until April and then you get the full 7%?
I
didn't say that.
It's not such a silly question.
As a development person, would I be looking at that?
Yeah, it depends on your development or housing need approach. Yeah, and it also depends on what your board stipulate is the policy of the organisation as well. Yeah, sure. And how up against it with a grant deadline you are as well. Yeah.
Okay, so if we go with what John is saying, what I might decide to do is I'm going to clear that box.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen is that you've now made the rent birthday or the inflation birthday now be the handover one. So in other words, the next rent inflation will only happen in March the year after, and March every year after that.
Yeah, that's important.
Do be careful what you've set and what you wish for, because you might get it. So in effect, if I don't define a month, it's going to be at the birthday or the handover date of the unit every 12 months.
Yeah.
That means you're going to have in the following year only 11 months worth of uplift, and you've got less money. So just be careful that you set what it is that you want.
In the drop down there, you have actually got handover month, haven't you? So where you went for April. So
there
come down.
Handover date, March.
No, go back to rent inflate from. Sorry, I'm being pedantic here. You've actually got handover month, occupancy month as options. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's effectively the same as blank.
Yeah, same as March. That's saying it's March. Okay.
Yeah.
Question here, right? So someone anonymous has said, are you suggesting that 2024 will be set at 7% if we get this agreement, or that 2023 will be amended from 4.1 to 7%? So the table in the background that you showed at the beginning, would we amend that to what if it was confirmed, or when it's confirmed, the 2023 that is fixed? That's right, Paul, isn't it? The 2024 would be 7%.
There would be an addition in there, so I'll just modify this one.
Yeah.
So this would go to 2024.
So that's 23-24.
And this is not something you can do yourselves, but this would go to 7%.
So it will look like that. So anonymous, that's what it would look like once it's been confirmed, if it's confirmed for new build as well as existing.
We're assuming then you would go back to base of 2 plus 1, back to 3% after that, unless we're told otherwise.
Yep.
Does everybody sort of understand that?
Yeah.
If I delay this unit, which is effectively what we were talking about a moment ago, John. So if I do that £112.81, and I go and in my additional attributes, I say, well, in actual fact, this is going to take 1 more month to deliver. It's going to push it into April, and you'll see that I've now gone to £116.20. And when we look at the cash flow, we're going to get that £116.20 for 12 months, and it's only going to go up in April next year. So if I just scroll along here to April. So the first inflation is going to be in April next year. So effectively, I'm going to get 12 months of rent at the opening rent, rather than 1 month at the opening rent and then an increase.
And so the question then comes, obviously there can be more conflict with 80% of market rent with the LHA in higher valued areas. So the rent setting is important on where you set residential rents in black to make sure that your rents are 80% of market rent capped at LHA.
If that's the organization's choice, there are quite a few RPs that don't recognize LHA. They just go 80% of market.
Okay.
And I think a lot of it's got to do with the policy of the organization rather than, in other words, there are quite a few RPs that are not directly in discussion with the local authority, which surprises me because most of them are obliged to, but I'm not going to get involved in the politics of it.
Sure.
As an organization, they've elected to not use the LHA cap, but in ProVal, you can use the LHA cap if you wish to. John?
Yeah.
LHA cap was kind of a response by the affordable sector when affordable rents came in, because the guidance on setting an affordable rent is up to 80% of market. It doesn't make any comment on LHA, and it's the affordable sector have said, well, this is our other benchmark because a lot of our residents are in receipt of LHA or housing benefit, and so that's why they added that to their own mantra. It's not part of the actual construct of affordable rent. It's been added by the affordable sector. But because we support the affordable sector, we've given that option in the rent setting area.
Okay, thank you.
I suppose, interestingly, the private registered providers, the PRPs coming into delivery, are looking at that and not even thinking about the LHA. They're thinking about 80% of market as affordable rent. But as we all know, even a House of Commons statement document said comment that affordable rent isn't really affordable. I've seen plenty of tenancies handed back by by households who's saying we can't afford these rents. We thought it was else. Yeah.
And rightly, as Mark says, isn't this through in the Section 106 agreement? The term is capped at LHA.
It can come into the Section 106 agreement. Yeah, it can be defined within.
That's by discussion and agreement, isn't it?
Yeah, but most local authorities would want that because they want it to be affordable in their area. Is that?
So I've seen in some of the very high value areas where they're using 60 and 70% of market rent because the 80% just doesn't fly. They can't find tenants that can afford it. And I think it will vary from one area to another. Typically in high conurbation areas, the rents are quite high because obviously they're very competitive. Lots of people competing for these rents. And certainly once you get out into the countryside, the smaller, the RPs in the smaller areas or less built up areas, you'll find the rents are actually quite reasonable. But it will vary. I mean, the range of rent for a 2-bedroom unit just is enormous across the sector. Okay,
another good question that's just come in, anonymous, is, okay, we've done an appraisal last year. Our rents are going to be coming in post April 23. Will ProVal automatically update or inflate those rents or yes, not? How's it handled?
So the learning should have been at the time that we were training you was on a board approved appraisal. You obviously don't want to go to the end of the project, open it up and it's automatically updated because things there's an outside influence on the rent calculation. What you need to do on board approved is to lock the rents. So anything that you want to open and you want to go back and get the same answers so you can look at it historically, the rents should be locked. Any user of ProVal can lock rents. They have to be physically unlocked for the new calculation to come through.
Right. Okay. So you've done an appraisal. It's been board approved. you should lock the rents, and that should be saved in
Your
a
board folder. Yeah.
folder.
It should be part of your procedures where you are going to agree on a set of numbers that's got rents in it. The rents should be locked.
So if you had a policy saying no, we are going to increase those rents to pick up the new inflation, you'll then take a copy of that board approved and then unlock the rents.
Unlock it, yeah.
And then save a copy as unlocked rents following, I don't know, discussion with Homes England or whatever in the notes.
Yeah, so I tend to have a folder called in contract, and these are my working documents.
Okay.
So that's the way I approach it. And when I teach, I do the same thing. So I got a board approved one that's locked up. I would then duplicate it, put it into my contract, one of my contract folders, and effectively that's an unlocked one. So you can open up and see, because it is quite common during a 2-year build or a process that the rents have changed during that time. So your handover rents are going to be higher or perhaps lower, whichever way the market has gone. So you do need to know where is this gone. Also, when you get to the end of a project, you've spent 2 years building it, the rents might be different as well. If you've set manual rents, in other words, if you have set a rent based upon a market rent per week and you've typed in a market rent, that's not going to change. But things that are set at so in the rent box, you can set rents. Sorry, I've locked it now, so I can't alter it. So inside the rent boxes, you could in actual fact say this is going to be a percentage of LHA. Now, if the LHAs change, that's obviously going to, so that's an external influence. Any rent that's calculated on an external influence should be locked. I think that it's a good idea to lock anything that's you want to be the same the next time you open it.
Good practice. Right. On that note, thank you, Paul. Can you stop sharing your screen now? We have, unfortunately, come to the end of our little hour of updates. And I know it's flown by. Thanks, John. There's been so much information now. I think everyone's going to step back and go, wow. This recording will be on our website, so you can access it and you can slowly go through all the points that John raised there, and obviously Paul's way of doing things in ProVal. The questions that have been posed, we will answer those fully and we will respond to those. And we've got some handouts there as well that we can help you in reviewing your appraisals. And John and Paul and myself have always done kind of viability workshops. So if you had the desire or want the team to discuss this in a bit more detail, we're happy to do live, yes, I said live workshops on viability, teaching people kind of the understanding of the background of ProVal or trends or strategy. So your whole team is pointing in the right direction. I just wanted to thank John and Paul for attending today. Our next webinar, we're going to have a little break for Christmas. So if you've got a burning kind of subject matter that you would like us to talk about and review, our next webinar will be on the 25th of January. So it's going to be the last Wednesday of every month. And so have a good Christmas and thank you for attending and good day.